if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. And for me, I am that person that has walked down the street and I have fallen into the hole and the pit quite a few times. And this time, guess what? I just walked down a different street. I actually learned from my mistakes. And that's one of the most beautiful things I think about what it is that I do and what my company and what we do is that I've walked in all of my clients' shoes. I know exactly the thought process that you experience and that you go through when you have not the best credit score. It is frustrating. It is embarrassing. It is something where you're just like, oh my gosh, like how did it get here? But I'm going to tell you now, I put my time in and I got myself to where I am today. All right, what's up, everyone? Micah Smith here. I am your host for the Rebuild and Rise show, and I come to you with solutions and stories and real life applications as far as just how you can make your life better. And this podcast, actually, the inspiration comes from something that I just experienced over the weekend. I am going to be giving you a lot of real life stories because who else better to tell a story than the person who's experiencing them? So over the weekend, I actually went to the dealership to buy a different car. So I wanted to trade my car in and I wanted to get a different one. And this was an amazing experience. Now, what I want to talk about is the person that I ran into at the dealership. So it's funny, as you're going through the application process, they always ask you, what is it that you do? And so I said, hey, listen, I'm the owner of a credit restoration firm and we help individuals with their personal credit. So if someone comes here to the dealership and they want to buy a car, we're going to help them get their credit scores up so we can get them better rates. And so one of the gentlemen at the dealership, he's like, oh my gosh, he's like, give me your card right now. And I'm like, okay, you got it. You got it. He's like, I'm going to call you immediately. He's like, I'm going to talk to you on Monday and I can't wait. And I said, sure. So he was actually sitting at the desk right behind me when I was doing my application with one of the other sales reps. And as we were chit-chatting, he told me about his credit. And he's like, yeah, I just got a notification on my Credit Karma that my scores dropped 110 points. And I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, what happened? And he's like, well, my student loans. So he had this whole story about his student loans. And so what had happened so deferments had been in place for quite some time. Deferments, forbearance for student loans for the last really about 5 years, really since 2020. And all of a sudden, student loans became due. And him, along with 4 million other Americans, did not realize that his payment was due. They didn't have the right phone number for him. They didn't have the right address on file for him. And so what happened was he got hit with this string of late payments and his scores came tumbling down. He's mortified. And he's like, what can you do? So listen, I'm in the business of being completely transparent and honest with people and making sure that I don't give them false hope. I give them hope, but I don't give them false hope. So we were discussing it and I was like, okay. And I recently just came back from this amazing event in Texas. And I was sitting with student loan attorneys who we discussed this very topic. And my job as a credit specialist and as someone who does credit restoration is our job is to get negative items off of credit reports. And it's based off of how they're reported and if they can be proven. And there are certain things that can be very, very difficult to remove. And one of them is a brand new late on an open active payment or on an open active trade line, I should say rather. So this student loan that he owes money on and that he is supposed to be making payments on every single month, right? And he's like, Mike, I just literally ruined my credit. My payment is like $40 a month. And I was like, I know. I'm like, there is no bias towards wealth. It doesn't matter whether it's a $40 missed payment or a $60 missed payment. It's going to be the same no matter what. You're going to see this major and catastrophic drop. And so as we were discussing, I said, listen, that's going to be extremely hard for us to remove. I said, it's going to be pretty unlikely that we even have any movement on those particular items, maybe even in the first 6 months that you're with us. So he's like, okay. I said, but listen, at the end of the day, I said, it's worth a conversation. I was like, let's have a conversation with my team. And so I pointed him towards my team. So he's going to speak to my team this week on Wednesday. I said, what we can also do is if we can't get those off, I said, we'll look at the rest of your credit and we'll see what else is available and how else we can boost your score. And he was really downtrodden about the whole thing. And I said, listen, at the end of the day, the older they get, the less they are going to impact your score. We're going to work on trying to repair them. And I said, but we'll also see what we can do on the back end as well. Like, well, how is your positive credit doing? We'll look at your credit cards. We'll look at the history. We'll see what other things are on there as far as negatives are concerned. And we'll get your scores up as high as possible. And he's like, okay, that sounds great. But one of the biggest things that we discussed today is probably one of my favorite tips that I give in all of my classes. And so as we were talking, we were discussing the term. So the term is authorized user. And authorized user is one of my favorite tricks in the book of all time. And this helps you maximize your credit scores more than you could ever possibly comprehend. But you have to do it the right way. So the way it works, and I'm actually going to tell you how it worked with me and my husband. So when my now husband and I started dating. So about 2 months into the dating process, my now husband, he came into my office and he had a printout of his credit report and he plops it on my desk. And he's like, well, what do you think? And I look at it and I'm like, 840. And I just like kind of did an eye roll. I was like, of course. And I was like, great. Now we can continue dating. So, but I'm looking through his credit report and I'm like, oh my gosh. I'm like, how in the world do you have a 29-year-old credit card? I'm like, this is insane. And he's like, well, I opened it when I was 18 years old and I never closed it. And I was like, oh my gosh. I was like, this is gold. And he's like, really? He's like, I was thinking about closing it because he's like, I don't really use it. He's like, there's no good points attached to it. He's like, I don't really get any cash back. So he's like, so you're saying keep it open? I'm like, oh my God, yes. I like freaked out. I was like, you have to keep this thing open. I was like, but even a step further, I was like, not only do you need to keep this open, but make sure to use it. But on top of that, I was like, I need you to add me as an authorized user to your credit card. I was like, please. And at this point, my husband turned whiter than a ghost. He was mortified. He's like, what? He's like, you want me to what? My credit card? You add to it? And I was like, hold on, let me explain to you how it works. He was so skeptical. So anyone who knows my husband, he is a 5 when it comes to Enneagrams. So if you don't know what Enneagrams are, it's a really cool personality test. And he's the most unique one, which is an investigator. So he pokes holes in everything. Like he has questions about everything. He wants to know everything about everything, which is amazing for me. But he was like, okay, I need to do my research on this. And so he's like, okay, how does it work? So I said, okay, what you're going to do, I said, you're going to call the bank and you're going to say, I want to add my girlfriend, Micah, to my credit card as an authorized user. He's like, uh-huh. I said, and then I said, you're going to get a card in the mail with my name on it. And he's like, and then? I said, and then you're going to cut it up and you're going to throw it away. I said, I don't need to see it. I don't need to use it. I don't need to activate it. And he's like, okay, so what's the whole point? I don't understand. I said, the whole point is that as an authorized user, I become the beneficiary of all of your positive habits for the last 29 years. And so what happens is all of your history will end up transferring to my credit report in really about 30 to 45 days. That's like the standard time frame. And he's like, okay. And he's like, well, what if you screw up something? And I was like, well, the beautiful thing about this, I said, is that no matter what I do, nothing of mine will ever impact you. He's like, really? I said, really? I said, listen, I've been in this business for quite some time. I said, and I still don't have bragging rights. I was like, so just remember, right? At 780, like that's like the premium for everything. So anything past that is just bragging rights. And I wanted them. Gosh darn it. I wanted them. And so he conceded and he agreed and he added me to the credit card as an authorized user. And so sure enough, in about 30 days, my score was at about a 760 at that time. I went from a 760 all the way up to an 826. And boy, oh boy, oh boy, did that feel amazing. And so what I would implore everyone out there to do is take this information and apply it. So, when I was speaking to this gentleman at the car dealership and we were discussing his credit score, I said, listen, I said, we need to maximize, he was young too. We need to maximize your history. So, what people don't realize is that 15% of your entire credit score comes from how long you've had credit. And so, just a fun fact for everyone, FICO is looking for an average of a 25-year length of history to get you to a true 850. So, really, you're not going to see someone with a true 850 unless they're at least 50 years old or older. And so this is actually how we're able to help someone build history without actually establishing any real risk. So when this young man and I were speaking, I said, is there someone that that can maybe add you to really old credit cards as an authorized user? And then I went through this whole explanation, like I just did for all of you, as far as how it works. And he was beyond excited. And he's like, well, I don't really have anyone. He's like, but my stepmom does help me manage my finances. I said, really? And he's like, yeah, he's like, she's got a really good credit score. I said, okay, so she would be your go-to. Ask her if she can add you to her oldest credit cards as an authorized user. And so if she does that, then he's probably going to see a nice boost in his score. Now, keep in mind, when you have a bunch of negative, right, it's not going to be as impactful as, say, my scenario, because I didn't have any negative to offset. So when you have negative to offset, you're going to get a lot less of a boost, but you're still going to probably get a decent boost. And depending on which industry is pulling your credit is going to determine obviously how that score looks when it's repulled. And every industry is going to be a little bit different. And we've gone over this in quite a few different podcasts, but just remember, each score is going to be different based off of what you're applying for. So if you're going for a car loan, they're going to use a different algorithm. If you're going for a mortgage, they're going to use a different algorithm. If you're looking for a credit card, they're going to use a different algorithm. If you're looking for business credit, this actually is not really going to help you. Business credit is very, very different than personal, and we'll go into that in a separate podcast, but business and personal are very, very different. So if you're looking to get better business credit lines, doing this for your personal credit is not going to be nearly as impactful. So just keep that in mind. So authorized user is one of our absolute favorite tips on the planet for helping people maximize and boost credit scores. And so what I wanted to say is, again, make sure, so once you hear this, make sure that you apply this tip. So the key thing is, right, so knowledge isn't power, applying it is. And this is Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins says this, I'm just going to say, like, sidebar, it always drives me crazy when I hear all these people quote all these other people, but they don't actually give the person credit who said it. I'm like, how can you do that? I'm like, this is not all original content, guys. I have been listening to thousands of speakers over my lifetime, and I'm always going to try to give credit to where credit is due because I think that's very important. So, but Tony Robbins always says, knowledge isn't power, it's applying it that is. So I'm giving you this information. Now go out there and apply it. Again, what you're looking for. And again, people get really, really, they make this very obfuscated and all of a sudden they get really fixated on limits. Remember, guys, there is no bias towards wealth in the algorithms, which means, right, don't get fixated on these giant limits because that's not what is going to move the needle. What's going to move the needle is going to be this long length of history. So how long you have credit, right, that's going to move the needle. But just remember this too, when you're getting added to someone else's credit history, make sure you remember this. You take the good with the bad. And so let's just say that the person you piggyback off of or become an authorized user on, let's just say that they miss a payment or they stop paying that credit card altogether and they charge it off. That is going to hurt you tremendously. So make sure you piggyback off of someone that you know and trust will pay their bills. I can tell you now, speaking from experience and knowing my husband, I trust him implicitly because I know how he manages money, his relationship with money. He would never miss a payment, right? It's just not who he is. So make sure you remember that. That's very, very important. Half of what we do is we'll be looking at credit reports and we'll be seeing people who were authorized users on credit cards that were charged off. Now, you as the authorized user, you are not liable for that credit card, but I'm going to tell you the bank is going to want to keep that on the credit report. And you want to know why? Because they're hoping that by having you, right, on that credit card as an authorized user, having it reported to your credit report, and they know how hard it can be to get removed, they're hoping it's going to enhance or give them more of a possibility of a chance of collecting those funds, right? So So you just want to make sure, again, this is caution word to the wise. Make sure whoever you piggyback off of, make sure you piggyback off of someone that is very, very responsible. The other thing to note, since this is a podcast and since you get to speak to someone whose job is nitty gritty and making those scores as high as possible, make sure to please stay away from American Express. And the reason why is we love our American Express cards. I use mine for everything. However, American Express will only give you credit from the day that you're added versus from the day that the card was opened. So you're not going to see nearly the same boost as if you get added to something old. And oftentimes it can actually take people backwards. So a lot of people, I'll see them, they'll go to TikTok or Instagram and they'll watch something and maybe they only retained half of the information, or maybe they actually didn't get correct information. So all of a sudden they start getting added to credit cards as authorized users thinking, oh, this is going to help me out so much. Well, again, make sure you're very, very cautious as far as what you're added to. The other problem that we're seeing as well is people will get added to authorized user accounts that are maxed out. So remember, and if you listen to one of my last podcasts, you're going to remember, right, the sweet spot for where you need to be with your credit cards. Each individual credit card needs to be at 6% utilization or less in the perfect world. Okay. So, and it's not that you can only spend 6%, it's that it needs to be paid down to 6% or less by the time it reports. And this topic is really, really important because, like, for instance, this morning I was just speaking to one of our clients and she's extremely frustrated. She's like, I don't understand what is happening with my credit right now, Micah. She's like, I literally am seeing my score go 15 points down, 20 points down, 15 points down, 20 points down, and it's constant. And because I know this client very well, I said, listen, bleep. I said, I know your spending habits pretty well. And I said, one of the biggest things that I have noticed about you is that you do pay your credit cards down, but you don't pay them down by the right date. So you need to know what the actual closing date is. So the statement closing date is really going to be your reporting date. So if you need to call the credit card company, if you have a consultation with my firm and we give it to you, which we do, right, then you'll know what day to pay the credit card down by. But it's just one day a month, right? And that's going to be the sweet spot. So make sure that, again, whoever you piggyback off of is applying all of these little things, because otherwise it could actually bring your scores backwards. So I want to make sure that I give you everything in order to be successful. And of course, if you want help with this and you want to work with a professional so we can analyze your scenario and your situation so we can tell you exactly, right, which direction you should go, then we're happy to do so. It was really amazing. So when I got started in this business, I don't know if I actually even told my whole story. So right before I opened my firm, it was COVID that had actually prompted me to move forward into starting my firm. And I still remember the client that I was speaking to. Prior to COVID, I was out selling, I was outside, I was only dealing with the business to business side. And I still remember the client to this day that gave me the momentum and the clarity and the overall just confidence to start my own company. What it was is I had a woman and we were looking at her credit report. She was very well to do. I can't obviously tell you who they are, but they're very well to do. They're a very famous couple. So I'm looking at their credit report and they were trying to buy their dream home while the wife's credit was not where it needed to be, and part of it was a lack of length of history. Well, no other credit repair firm would ever have been able to see this ever except for us. So in order to get her into premium tiers, I studied her husband's credit report, I studied her credit report, and I was like, okay, here's what you're going to do. So I had her get added to all of the correct credit cards of her husband's. I had her close out a couple of new ones. I know this is going to cause a lot of confusion for a lot of people. I had her get added to a bunch of really old ones. I had her close out a couple of her brand new ones, and I had her use her old ones. And we were able to get her back into premium tiers just by moving the credit cards around appropriately. And it was at this moment that I realized that clients needed so much hand holding. And again, our goal is to get our clients usually into a home. If you're looking for general credit repair, we've got you all that. But we wanted to get them into their dream home, and we did. And so it was this maneuvering of positive credit that we were able to get them there. And had they not been working with us as a team and me as a specialist, they would have never gotten there because there was nobody else that knew the information that we had. And so this is a great example of, right? Knowledge isn't power, it's applying it that is. And so it's my favorite thing on the planet to troubleshoot and solve people's problems, right? They say if you can solve people's problems, you're literally never going to have to worry about money a day in your life. And it's a fact. And it's my absolute pleasure to help people solve their problems, right? And so sometimes, our answer might be, well, maybe not right now, but maybe in 6 months, maybe in 8 months, maybe in a year. And I do believe that everything happens for you and not to you. So if you find yourself in a situation where your credit is less than exemplary, right, put the time in and the money in and put the investment into yourself to make it better, because it's going to save you more in the long run than it's going to cost you in the short run. And so one of the things that I did want to discuss, because again, I was in the car dealership this weekend, and I did want to just continue to impress upon everyone just the difference in price points when you have a great credit score versus a not so great credit score. And so let's just say you went in and you are getting a $35,000 loan, right? Well, if you don't have great credit, and we're going to put you into like the very subprime category, which is going to be like around the 500 credit score. Let's just say you were getting a $35,000 loan. Your interest rate on average would put you at right about 15.75% or 16%, and your payment would be at about $840. Okay, $840, and that's not including your insurance. So you're going to be spending about $1,100 to maybe $1,200 for a $35,000 loan, and whatever that looks like to you, right? Versus if you were to get into premium tiers, right? So premium tiers, right? That's going to be that person that's like 760, 780. And those tiers, rates are not fantastic right now. So you're probably going to find yourself in like the 6% interest rate as of right now. So that's going to put you around like the 600 and maybe like $50 range for your monthly payment. But if you look at the difference between the two, that's roughly equating to just about $200 a month just on the car payment alone. And you're looking probably, my speculation would be for insurance. So your insurance is going to be anywhere from $100 to $200 different a month. So same car, two people. So person A has bad credit, person B has great credit. Person A, right, is going to pay roughly anywhere between $300 to $400 more a month for the car than the person with great credit. $400 a month, and that's a car. Right? So we've talked a little bit about interest on mortgages, but car loans, it's no joke. So we're seeing, right? So you'll find like on a $35,000 loan, if you're at that super subprime tier, in that super subprime tier, which we see it all the time, you're going to be paying well over $13,000 in just interest on a $35,000 loan. Think about that for a second. That is so much money. And that's based off of like a 60-month term, which is very common. Versus say, right, you're in premium tiers, you're looking at around 7,000 or maybe a little bit less depending on interest rates at that time. And every dealership is going to be a little bit different. Some dealerships have 0% interest. And of course, if you have 0% interest, I mean, my goodness, I mean, that's like free money. You're literally getting free money. However, there's some dealerships, right, they'll go to 2%, 3%. So the lower you can go, the better. But you're not going to have those options if you don't have phenomenal credit. And so the other thing I wanted to discuss when I was there getting my car, so right, so I own a company. So I wanted to put this underneath my business. So my business credit, part of my homework from my business coach was going and getting installment loans underneath my business to continue to build my business credit. And so because I have such stellar personal credit, right? They looked at it, and it was one of the most seamless processes on the planet because not only did I own my car outright, I have phenomenal personal credit. I did all the little steps over here to make sure that when they pulled up my business, right, all the right things would reflect. I did my homework. I cannot tell you the peace of mind of having done all the right things and walking into a dealership confidently, knowing full and well that whatever I needed was available. But it's because I took the time to plan and to prepare, right? So I have been looking for a very long time to make sure I got something that suited my needs for where I'm at in my life and my business. And they say if you fail to plan, then plan to fail. And for me, I have, and if you've heard my podcast prior, I am that person that has walked down the street and I have fallen into the hole and the pit quite a few times. And this time, guess what? I just walked down a different street. I actually learned from my mistakes. And that's one of the most beautiful things I think about what it is that I do and what my company and what we do is that I've walked in all of my clients' shoes. I know exactly the thought process that you experience and that you go through when you have not the best credit score. It is frustrating. It is embarrassing. It is something where you're just like, oh my gosh, like, how did it get here? How did I get here? But I'm going to tell you now, I put my time in and I got myself to where I am today. And because of that, I want you to know that you also can get yourself to where you need to get to. And I have so much on the tip of my tongue because I just did a podcast this morning. I filmed a podcast this morning with one of my really good girlfriends. She's super successful. So if you're not following Michelle Barone online, you have to follow Michelle. She does a great podcast called Red. So this morning, she asked me a couple of really powerful questions. One of the ones that she asked was, if you have someone, Micah, who is wondering, I don't know if I can afford this. I don't know if I can do this whole credit repair thing. I just don't know, how much is this going to cost me? And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this question. And here's how I answered it is, how much is it going to cost you? Well, and this is something that Tony Robbins talks a lot about, and so does Ed Milet. And they talk about everything in life has a cost, right? So if you do it, there's a cost, right? There's that monetary cost. If you don't do it, there's also a cost. So my question for someone trying to negotiate with themselves as to whether they can or can't afford to fix their credit is, what are you willing to give up? If you're not fixing your credit, what are you giving up? Think about that for a second. What are you giving up? Do you want to part ways with a little bit of money every single month until you get it fixed? Or do you want to split ways with about 10 times over our fee every single month and continue getting denied and put into bad situations because you're afraid to walk down a different path? And so I would ask all of you, instead of sitting here and negotiating with yourself as far as if I can and can't afford it, well, why don't you sit and weigh the cost and say, here are my goals. Here's what I'm trying to accomplish. What do I need to do in order to get there? And we discussed a lot this morning, my personal story. And I'm not going to get too much into it right now, but my personal story is very, very empowering because I made a choice. And my choice was, my actions are not in alignment with where I say I want to be. And so guess what I did? A really simple thing. I said, this isn't working. So I stopped doing it and I chose a different path. So I hope, for all of your own sakes today, I hope that you choose to walk down a different path. God bless.